Hi, everybody, and good evening. Nice to see you here on a warm Tuesday evening, right? What was it, 50 today, I think? Yeah. I'm so glad to welcome you here to the second event in our Branford Land Trust Winter Speaker Series this evening. My name's Claire Hambley, and I'm part of the Branford Land Trust. And it is my pleasure tonight to introduce you to our speaker. But before we do, a few things. Got some pieces of paper here that I got to read from. The first thing is to just give a little bit of context about who we are and why we're here. The Branford Land Trust was established in 1967, and we're a nonprofit that protects over 1,000 acres of land in Branford. Many of you know that already because many of you have seen our little signs on the side of the road or walked on some of our trails. Many of you may be members. I know many of you are also part of the board or volunteer with us in other ways. So thank you so much to those of you who do that and to those of you who will, because by being here tonight, you are also part of the work that we do. So thank you for that. If you haven't yet signed up to volunteer, or if you haven't yet signed up to be a member or renew your membership, consider this a very warm invitation to do so at our website, bradfordlandtrust.org. Our web designer is here in the audience today. She's been doing some beautiful work on the website, and it's really easy to navigate and really easy to find your way around. And if you feel yourself so inclined to make a donation to contribute to the work that we do, you'll also find that space there as well. And if you're not ready to volunteer, but just want to come and find out more, well, then check out the events page. And I'm happy to tell you that our next event is on Saturday this week. We're very fortunate to have our friends Tom Cleveland and Chris Werner joining us for their annual tracking walk. We're going to be meeting at Lake Saltonstall at 9:30 on Saturday to find out who goes there. And some animal tracks and some trails and some spoor. There's a lot of activity out there, actually, more than one might think. So that's on Saturday. And then in addition, 2 final events in this year's speaker series here at the Blackstone Library next month, March 25th. Come to learn about the circular economy with Tess Lee. And then on April 22nd, to hear about forest health and climate change with David Irvin. And soon I'm going to introduce you to this evening's speaker, but before I do, please allow me to read our land acknowledgements. The Branford Land Trust acknowledges the people who have called the lands we conserve home. We honor the Totoket and the Nunkatak bands of the Quinnipiac people who were dispossessed of these lands. We pay respect to those who are no longer here, and we celebrate the continuing and future presence of Indigenous people in this region. We are grateful for their stewardship of land, water, plants, and animals over thousands of years. We also recognize other people, past, present, and future, with connections to this land. Those who were enslaved and brought here against their will, those who come for a better life, and others who flee danger and seek refuge here. We vow to protect the land in perpetuity, to foster access to nature for all people, and to help heal our human relationship with the earth. So important. And it resonates so well with what I'm about to read to you about tonight's speaker, Sam King. Sam is an educator, facilitator, and environmentalist. He's the Director of Sustainability for the Marist Network of Schools. And in this role, he works with youth leaders across the country to promote grassroots engagement on climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and environmental injustice. As if that weren't enough, he also serves as a research associate for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. And he's a project manager for an Emmy award-winning film called Journey of the Universe, a film and multimedia project, curating a monthly newsletter and hosting a podcast where he speaks with influential scientists, artists, spiritual leaders, and environmentalists. As an avid gardener, forager, and outdoorsman, he lives on ancestral Quinnipiac land in New Haven, Connecticut. And Sam has let me know that on the table on the left, as you go out, you will be able to find an assortment of literature and copies of that film that I've just described, as well as opportunities to sign up for mailing lists, to make donations, and to pay a contribution to his materials. Also on the right-hand side as you go out, beverages and snacks courtesy of David March Schneider sitting here in the front row. But let's put it together, please, for Sam. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Hey, well, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for being here on a Tuesday evening. And I want to give a special thanks to Claire for that very kind introduction, and to Clara for inviting me in. Claire has become a friend and collaborator, a local earth keeper, and I'm just really grateful for this opportunity to engage with you all, friends and board members, and all those who are supporters of the Branford Land Trust. So Claire gave a nice introduction, but my name is Sam. I live in New Haven, Connecticut. I've been there for about 5 years. I myself grew up in the Hudson Valley, not too far away. So my journey has taken me to various different bioregions and parts of the world, but it's a gift to be here at the Blackstone Library here in Branford, to be with you all, to see my spiritual director, Tran Meyer, and his partner Kathleen, who surprised me this evening and have been a huge source of spiritual nourishment in my own journey. So deep gratitude. And so I'm here to engage with you all tonight around this theme of recovering kinship with the living earth. And this question of how do we, through our collective work, through our collective land stewardship, through our education, community efforts, our conservation efforts, how do we appeal to our innate sense of belonging as creatures among fellow creatures on this beautiful but fragile planet? And I'd like to suggest that this experience of sacred participation in the community of life is something that is very innate to the human spirit. Virtually all cultures across the world who have lived in close relationship with lands and waterways develop a deep sense of responsibility and reverence and reciprocity, as authors like Robin Wall Kimmerer remind us through her work, Raiding Sweetgrass, and her latest book, The Serviceberry. And so I thought I would begin this evening by reading a poem that has really spoken to me from the indigenous Muskoka poet Joy Harjo. And that's also a way of honoring Harjo, who will be in Fairfield next Wednesday to receive the Denise Levertov Award for her remarkable poetry at Fairfield University. So if any of you are around next Wednesday, you can perhaps be able to attend that event. But this poem is called Remember. Remember the sky that you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon. Know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn. That is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You were evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father. He is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind. Remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember, you are all people, and all people are you. Remember, you are this universe, and this universe is you. Remember, all is in motion, is growing, is you. Remember, language comes from this. Remember, the dance language is, that life is. Remember. So in that spirit of remembrance, I'm going to invite you for a moment to close your eyes and to remember a place that has been deeply sacred or important to you in your own life journey. Perhaps a place in your childhood, a place that you return to throughout your life journey that has somehow shaped you. Place where you felt deeply connected to the larger community of life. See if you can visualize any images from this sacred place. Are there any trees swaying in the wind? Are there any ocean waves rumbling across the shore? Is the sun glistening off of whirling leaves, an oak tree? See if you can hear any sounds from your special place. See if you can conjure a memory of soothing sounds. Imagine any smells from this sacred place that you might associate with a sense of home. Taking a moment to really sense into this special place in your life journey. And to take in the sense of participation in it all. Sense of what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing, being in deep relationship with this place. And when you're ready, you can begin opening your eyes and returning to this space, remembering that you carried forward the imprinting of this particular place, this particular experience in the life story that you are treading on this blue-green planet. And remembering that each of us is a composite of all the plants, animals, and fungi, and stones and geologies that have shaped our own journey on this earth. When I look back at my own personal journey into the realms of ecology and spirituality, I think back to my own early memories wandering along the beach in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, not far from me, where I used to go with my grandparents and my parents, and we used to run with our Labrador Retriever across this beautiful sun-speckled beach near the famous Outer Point Lighthouse, which you may be familiar with. And I remember in this region, which was actually stewarded by the Wind Point Land Trust, I remember running across the beach with our dog and just marveling at all the different creatures that would wash up along the shore. I would find horseshoe crabs and jellyfish. I would find periwinkle shells and whelks. I would find the bones of bluefish and striped bass, different types of seaweed. And I remember just marveling at how all this beauty could emerge from the vastness of the sea. And I still have these vivid memories from my earliest youth of that innate sense of wonder. I also remember from that early memory finding things like plastic bottles along the beach and finding syringes, sea glass, and wondering how this litter could exist side by side with all this beauty and biodiversity that I experienced. And so when I think back to my own sacred place of origin and my own journey, I think of that beach in Old Saybrook and how it's introduced me to this sense of awe and wonder of being alive on this blue-green planet. And then also the sense of responsibility to protect this beach and the living beings there for future generations. And when I look back on some of my educational experiences, which you might relate to, I pursued the study of environmental science. And from a young age in high school, I was involved with our school environmental proctors team, doing different environmental initiatives around the school. And I also took AP environmental science. But I remember in that class, what we were instructed to do was to copy down notes from the board in preparation for the AP exam at the end of the year. We weren't allowed to go outside. We didn't explore the woods or the ocean, the meadows or the marshlands. And so a part of me seemed to lose that innate childlike wonder that had been sparked in me from a very young age. And perhaps you can relate to a similar experience through your own educational journeys. And I certainly hope some of you had a more enchanting and wonder-filled educational schooling. But I like to suggest that early childlike participation in the larger, what Aldo Leopold called the biotic community of life, really came vivid to me when I left the US to go study and do field work in rural Sri Lanka. So I had first grown interested in college in the study of Theravada Buddhism, and particularly the practice of meditation and the teaching of what's called Samutya Samuppada, Praditya Samuppada, excuse me, which means dependent origination, or the idea that everything is causing everything else. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything is always in intimate relationship or interbeing. And so I went to go study those Buddhist teachings. And after college, I returned to Sri Lanka to study Buddhist teachings in an agricultural village. And so I traveled back to this island country south of India, which is about the size of West Virginia. And through my Sinhala language teacher, Sinhala is a language that comes from Sanskrit, I was welcomed to study in a community called Akiria in the central highlands of the country. So it was this very mountainous region that was incredibly biodiverse with subtropical forests. So that you would find papaya trees, mango trees, banana trees, pomegranate, coconuts, all sorts of medicinal herbs. And this community was almost entirely self-sufficient in growing their own rice and most of their own vegetables. So I actually lived with a host family that would have burlap sacks full of rice they had grown, nearly as high as the ceiling. And they were so resourceful. They had built much of their house using dried cow dung, which is a really effective form of insulation. And they would store most of their sustenance in their kitchen. They had chickens, they had cows that would provide fresh milk, and the community worked together to grow rice. And they had been practicing this form of agrarianism for thousands of years. And so I went to go study some of the Buddhist teachings that were associated with growing rice, because I was interested in how a thousands-year-old civilization had sustained that sense of deep reciprocity and connectedness with the land across time. So in preparation for my fieldwork, I bought a big pair of yellow boots in preparation of trudging around the rice paddies. And I remember putting them in my backpack and walking with my host mother, Kusumananda, down to the rice paddies. And we got to the edge of the rice paddies, which were these verdant fields that were built on terraces that would divert the mountain streams to irrigate these rice paddies. Just breathtakingly beautiful, as far as the eye could see. Inundated, filled with water for the first few months of the 3-month growing season. And at the edge of the rice paddies, she took off her slippers and waited for me to join her in the rice paddies. And of course, at that point, I took out my backpack and started strapping on these really ugly yellow boots, because I had personally encountered leeches, actually, in the village, and I'd heard that there were cobras that would swim around in the mud of the rice paddies. So needless to say, I was a little afraid. And as soon as I put those boots on, she yelled at me and said, "Epa," which means don't. And I kind of shook my head and said, "What do you mean? You know, what did I do wrong?" She said, "We walk barefoot in the rice paddies as a sign of respect." And I realized in that moment that she was walking into the rice paddies in the similar way that the village people would walk into the village temple. And that these lands, which had sustained the community for thousands of years, were considered sacred. I later had a chance to observe some of the rituals and practices embedded in rice cultivation. One of them was a ritual called Alutsahalmangale, which was an all-night offering ritual where the first rice harvest of the year was ritually offered to the Buddha in an all-night healing ceremony. So you can imagine, after 3 months of arduous work in the rice paddies, after threshing the fields and planting and weeding and harvesting the rice for the people's sustenance, they gave the first portion of the rice harvest away in this ritual. And that really struck a chord with me, right? That sense of deep reverence for the miraculous process that the earth undergoes to turn inorganic nutrients into the organic nutrients necessary for life. And so that experience in Sri Lanka really stuck with me as I returned back to Turtle Island, to the United States. And I came to wonder, how do we sustain a sense of deep reverence and reciprocity with the earth in our home bioregions? And I found it my first teaching job in Lakeville, Connecticut, teaching 9th and 10th grade, which mostly meant trying to stay one reading ahead of these really smart and often testy 14-year-olds. And I was trying to engage students in questions of philosophy and religious studies. So where do we come from? What is our relationship to the earth? How do we understand the nature of truth? Right? What is the nature of ultimate reality? Right? Big questions for a casual 16-year-old's, 8:30 a.m. morning period class. But we had a lot of fun. And it was during that period where I stumbled upon a program called Journey of the Universe, led by these two Yale professors named Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm. And so I was so intrigued by that program that I drove through the Berkshires of Connecticut in my used Prius and stumbled upon this program, just wide-eyed, open to what I might experience. And for the first time, I watched this film that is tracing the epic story of the universe across time. And I watched this story of everything we experience, beginning in this tiny unitive singularity 13.8 billion years ago, and then somehow transforming into as many as 1 trillion galaxies filled with hundreds of billions of stars, likely more, and eventually a solar system that would give rise to the formation of our planet Earth 4 billion years ago. And I was like, whoa, I never learned this in high school physics. I never had a chance to really meditate on what it meant to be deeply connected to this cosmic creativity dating back some 13.8 billion years. And as I watched this film, I really took in this message that the stars are our ancestors, as the film recounts. And that's just not just sort of abstract speculations. No, really, our bodies are made of the same elements, like carbon, that came through exploded supernova stars. And so what does it mean to be intimately connected to that creativity that has burst forth through 3 billion years of Earth's evolution of life since the earliest cell, and related to this evolution of eukaryotes, multicellular organisms, to the earliest formation of mammals, to the advent of primates, all the way up through the hominid line, and our lineage is Homo sapiens, and to be the lucky inheritor of all of this deep time creativity. Right? It really completely shook my world. And in that experience, I really felt this commitment to science and this sense of spiritual wonder really come together in my own life. And so it was during that experience of encountering Journey to the Universe, I later invited Mary Evelyn and John to come to the school I was teaching at called Hotchkiss and to screen the film and talk with students about what do some of these ideas mean, right? What does it mean that over the last 4 billion years, the sun grew 25% hotter, and yet the Earth somehow evolved to maintain a stable band of temperature necessary to sustain life? What does it mean to be alive at a moment where we are learning about our origins of the universe and the earth across time in ways that we didn't even know 100 or 150 years ago. And so I later decided to study with Mary Evelyn and John at this interesting program at Yale in what's called Religion and Ecology, which is this interdisciplinary program exploring the intersection of religion and spirituality and ecology and how we understand our connectedness to the earth. And during that time, Mary Evelyn and John exposed me to the teachings of the cultural historian Thomas Berry. We have some of Thomas's most influential works available on the table back there. And Thomas Berry was a cultural historian. He was a passionist priest, and he was what he called himself a geologian who wanted to understand how human consciousness and human religiosity emerged in the context of the evolution of our planet. In other words, how does the experience of the sacred or our deepest imagination and curiosity about the ultimate meaning and nature of existence, how do we understand that in the process of our evolution as human beings across time? And so Thomas Berry studied deeply in Western religions and theology. He studied and in China and later taught courses on Confucianism and Taoism. He taught some of the first courses in higher education in the US on Native American tradition and was in dialogue with Native American elders and teachers his whole life. And through his studies of the world's religions, he came to see that we are storytelling creatures. Our sense of meaning and value and who we are often begins with a sense of story. And he had this understanding that we need a new story to animate and inspire us in our own time. A story that is bringing together the wisdom of science with the sense of wonder and awe and the spiritual nourishment of the religious heritage of our planet. And so he wrote this essay called The New Story in 1978, which is really calling for us to awaken to our participation in the journey of our planet across 4 billion years and the larger story of our universe that took 13.8 billion years to come forth. And he wrote this line that really sums up in so many ways the arc of his teachings and his studies of the world's religious traditions, which is the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. And I'll say it again, the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. And he recognized that in a world that so often treats the more than human world as objects or things to be consumed by the human, we need a deeper sense of participation of the intersubjectivity of our world, right? We need to relate to our human community, our tree community, our plant community, our animal relatives as our kin, right? And to remember that sense of deep relationality that Joy Harjo was inviting us into through that poem. And like many of us, Thomas Berry really drew much of that spiritual insight from his early experience of wonder as a child. And so in his book, The Great Work, written in year 2000, he has a passage called The Meadow Across the Creek, where he reflects on this early epiphany he had in his own journey. I was a young person then, some 12 years old. My family was moving from a more settled part of a southern town out to the edge of town where the new house was still being built. The house, not yet finished, was situated on a slight incline. Down below was a small creek, and there across the creek was a meadow. It was an early afternoon in May when I first looked down over the scene and saw the meadow. The field was covered with lilies rising above the thick grass, a magic moment. This experience gave to my life something, I know not what, that seems to explain my life at a more profound level than almost any other experience I can remember. It was not only the lilies, it was the singing of the crickets and the woodwinds in the distance and the clouds in an otherwise clear sky. It was not something conscious that happened just then. I went on about my life as any young person might do. Perhaps it was not simply this moment that made such a deep impression upon me. Perhaps it was a sensitivity that was developed throughout my childhood. Yet as the years pass, this moment returns to me. And whenever I think about my basic life attitude and the whole trend of my mind and the causes that I have given my efforts to, I seem to come back to this moment and the impact it has had on my feeling for what is real and worthwhile in life. Whatever preserves and enhances this meadow in the natural cycles of its transformation is good. What is opposed to this meadow or negates it is not good. My life orientation is that simple. It is also that pervasive. It applies in economics and political orientation, as well as in education and religion and whatever. So like many of us, Thomas Berry had this early experience as a child, this early experience of wonder, of participation in the larger community of life that really animated his efforts to support the rights of nature movement, what he called earth jurisprudence, the rise of circular economies. I know that's the topic of your next program here, the Branford Land Trust. And the sense of responsibility each of us has to give to future generations a viable and healthy and flourishing planet. And so in that book, Thomas Berry relates that experience of the meadow to what he calls the great work of our time. And for Berry, the great work is the transition from an era of human devastation of our Earth's ecosystems to a period in which humans would be present to the planet in a mutually enhancing manner. He recognized, for instance, that we were living at a historical inflection point, that through the depletion of as many as 70% of the world's wildlife since 1970, we were giving rise to the 6th mass extinction event in Earth's 4 billion year history. And many of you are, of course, aware of the climate crisis that continues to spiral as we have warmed the planet some 1.2 degrees centigrade since 1850. And of course, the disproportionate impact of those tragedies on poor and vulnerable communities around the world. And so Berry invites us into what he calls the great work, or this inspirational possible vision of what he calls the Ecozoic era, right? This recognition that we're living at the end of the Cenozoic era of the last 65 million years since the extinction of the dinosaurs. And what's next? You know, what kind of world are we living into. And so in this book, The Great Work, and his earlier book called The Dream of the Earth, Thomas Berry invites us into participating in the Earth's dream. What is the Earth dreaming for through the human? Now, what possible dream could we participate in to create a flourishing future for this planet? And so Barry brings forth 4 major transformations to really enflesh this vision of what he calls the great work of our time. And the first is, of course, in ecological economics, this idea of realigning our economic systems with the limited carrying capacities of the Earth's ecosystems, challenging this idea of limitless economic growth on a finite planet. And how do we create regenerative forms of economics that give back to the Earth as we also take from the Earth? He invites us second into this vision of ecological law or Earth jurisprudence, with this recognition that the US drafted a constitution and a Bill of Rights, and then gave all the rights to the humans. And that we needed to listen to indigenous leaders. And like the Iroquois philosopher Wendat, who was very influential in the drafting of the Bill of Rights, and to honor the integrity of living beings and their right to exist and to habitat. And so Barry was very influential in the resurgence of the rights of nature movement, which has recently given rights to the Wanganui River in New Zealand, and just a few weeks ago now, Taranaki in New Zealand, also known as Aotearoa to the Maori peoples. He recognized third, the need for ecological education. So we need to teach our young people and remind all of ourselves about our connectedness to the Earth systems. We needed to introduce our children to the lands, to the waters, to the forests, to the birds, to the plants, to the fungi, to the world in which we live. And fourth, he recognized that all of these changes needed to have a spiritual depth and a sense of the sacred. He wrote, he said, only a sense of the sacred will save us. And he recognized the need for religions to draw on their ecological well springs to animate the needed changes to the Mesozoic era. So he was inviting the Judeo-Christian community to really think about the commandment in Genesis 1:28 to till and keep the earth rather than to have dominion or domination over the earth. Right? How do we participate, in the words of Norman Wiersbe, as earth keepers? Right? He spoke to the wisdom of Buddhism and speaking to the interconnectedness, the dependent origination of the earth systems. And figures like Thich Nhat Hanh, who speak to the idea that in a piece of paper is a cloud and a raindrop and a tree, all present in a single piece of paper. And so Barry invites us to think about, how do all of us draw upon our ancestral traditions and then also integrate the wisdom of science to really animate the needed changes to live out this dream of the earth. And so I want to conclude by really lifting up the vision and work of the Branford Land Trust here, which I see as a very important grassroots community-wide effort to secure this deep time future in which humans and plants and forests and salt marshes and migratory birds and all sorts of pollinators can all flourish in the some 1,500 acres of land you have worked to protect. And in this time of political upheaval, at a time of immense crackdown on public lands, we need to come together in grassroots communities, in land trusts, and to save these critical habitats, these havens for biodiversity, these safeguards against climate change, the important storm buffers of salt marshes, the incredible carbon sinks of our old forests, and to have the vision and the community resilience to be supporting these efforts for the deep time future. The Iroquois people have taught for many generations that any decision we make should consider 7 generations into the future. And I just wanted to uplift the visionary work of the Branford Land Trust for handing to posterity, to 7 generations, and hopefully many, many more, a flourishing and vibrant local community of life. So I want to thank you again for being here, and would love to hear from all of you and some questions and dialogue. Thank you so much for coming. Okay, maybe we can pass the mic around, and would love to just have an organic dialogue, hear more about all the experiences and wisdom that are here in this room.
Thank you very much. I learned a lot. When you suggested that we close our eyes and think about a location, I found myself traveling back several decades to my teenage years when I spent summers in northern Wisconsin, where my uncles and aunts and cousins were dairy farmers. And it occurred to me, I hadn't thought much about this before, that the small farmer, as they were relatively small at that time in terms of land use, I think one of the things I so enjoyed about them was that they treasured the land that they were using and dealt with it wisely. And now with the small farmers so struggling and most of them gone in this country, and with these large corporate food producers, I'm wondering if there's somebody else who may be taking up what was lost with those with the small farmer, and or whether that's just gone by the boards. I think for me it was a spiritual experience because I so treasured what they did, and hadn't really given it much thought until I listened to you. Anybody picking up on what's been lost?
Yeah. Does anybody else want to jump in response? Right, you guys. Maybe a more robust experience in agriculture.
Well, there are farmland trusts in various states. Conserving farmland, so.
Yeah, absolutely. The Inflation Reduction Act that was passed under the last administration also has certain protections and incentives for small farmers, right? And only time will tell what becomes of those incentives. But I can speak anecdotally about, I do think that more young people are homesteading, trying to grow food at home, and trying to kind of rekindle this back to the land movement. I know my partner and I, we grow lettuce and herbs and other vegetables in our small urban plot in New Haven. And I do think that there is this appetite among younger generations for trying to cultivate the land, recognizing it's very difficult to make a living as a small farmer in this country. But I do think the opportunity to cultivate locally and participate in community gardens is so vital. We have a divinity school garden in New Haven that I've been involved with at the Divinity campus. That is a really wonderful example of community garden. So I do think that it's really important that we come together to grow food locally, to even small ways, right? We sometimes use egg cartons to grow lettuce, actually, with little pockets of soil. And so being resourceful about where we are and what land we might have available and how do we cultivate in a respectful way. But I'd be curious if anybody else's comments or thoughts on that topic. Yeah.
Do you have any champions of your cause in state Congress or national Congress that would support your vision? Because it seems like a heck of a vision, but I see a big brick wall based on my experience with being an outdoor educator and growing up in a town that was full of tobacco fields and evergreen trees and nurseries and cornfields. And you need another Kmart, or they're out of business, I'm sorry. You need another Lowe's or something like that. That's what Walmart, thank you, I couldn't think of that. Do you have any champions for you?
Do you know anybody I can call up? I'm here looking for connections. I'm hoping for you. Thank you. Well, it's a great question. And the Green New Deal had a great amount of resurgence and interest some 5 years ago and didn't really have the congressional support that it needed to move forward. And so I think we need to be thinking strategically and especially on a local level. My friend and advocate, Kim Stoner, who is active in our local Quaker community, New Haven, is working to secure the Environmental Rights Amendment of Connecticut with a woman named Maya Van Rossum. So trying to guarantee the right to clean air and clean water and enshrine that effort in the state constitution by way of amendments. And so I've been supporting that effort. And if any of you are interested in supporting that effort as it's taken up by the new legislature this year, feel free to let me know and I can put you in touch with Kim and others who are trying to really work locally to protect what we can.
I don't know if this is really a question. Someone is, excuse me, you had mentioned Miss Barry's book, Dream of the Earth, and maybe you can think about Dreamtime and the Aborigines. And I'm wondering, studied any of their concepts and have you thought about that?
Thank you for that great question. And the answer is yes. Thomas Berry did study Aboriginal culture. He was in dialogue with Iroquois chief Warren Lyons, many indigenous leaders throughout the world. And the course we developed a few years ago on indigenous religions and ecology is one of our 6 online courses on religions and ecology. And that course has a unit on Aboriginal teachings and song lines. I remember an interview from that project with Bob Randall, who's an Aboriginal elder, and he had this quote where he said, "We don't own the land owns us." That really stuck with me. And Thomas Berry was definitely influenced by shamanic traditions of dream time and the philosophy of Carl Jung, psychoanalyst, of our dreams being somehow revelatory, or we can learn about our lives, our journeys, our ecosystems through really making conscious the wisdom of our dreams. And so that dream of the earth for Barry was very much bringing forth that, I would suggest, that indigenous wisdom that Aboriginal peoples have brought forth, of really seeing the landscape through the Aboriginal practice of song lines. And then also I would suggest folks like Carl Jung, who is very interested in the power of dreams. If you think about any, it might sound a little hokey, but who had the idea for a library, right? Who had the idea for a government, right? To some degree, it always begins with a vision. It begins with a dream, right? And I would suggest that we, in this time of upheaval and great challenge, we need to take seriously these visions, these dreams that come to us that can bring forth a more flourishing way of life.
I just think that the dream or the vision can be very small. It can be in our backyard. It can be just transitioning from a planted status of the lawn to planting even a part of it to natives, which will bring in a huge diversity and a build of our ecosystem. So I think you can think very small, and that can spread into have a tremendously positive impact.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I love how you're bringing up pollinator pathways, the need to plant native plants. I have a friend in New Haven who's salvaging old historical remnants, like old signs and old wood from old buildings, and then using them to plant native plants and pollinator gardens. So he's like preserving history while propagating milkweed and asters and goldenrod and other native species that we need to sustain monarchs and bees and other endangered insects and butterflies.
Plant an oak tree, and one oak tree.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Thomas Berry dedicated the dream of the earth to this great red oak tree that was growing on the banks of the Hudson River, or what Algonquin peoples have known as the river that runs both ways. And I have actually planted acorns from that very tree. And that one tree has spawned a number of different red oak trees through other people who have been influenced by Thomas's ideas. So I think we really need to take seriously these ideas to have a ripple effect.
And what we can do individually.
Exactly.
What you were saying about planting a garden, we all have something that we can do, and we know what it is. I wanted to write. I worked at Yale too, in the environmental science departments, and did modeling and stuff like that. But I wanted to write, and I wanted to make a difference, because I felt that with climate change, people just didn't get it. So I went ahead and wrote a series of books. I'm not trying to sell it to you. It's sold in Connecticut. It's set in Tucket, the first book. But that wasn't my point. My point is that I have that story to tell. So I told it. Okay. I didn't make it to bestseller them. I maybe only reached 30,000 people. That's a lot.
Yep.
Take that story of that farm in Wisconsin and do what you know that you can do with it. I wrote it. I'm still writing. I've got nearly 50 books now. And every single one of them say one thing is a theme. The environment matters.
Yeah. hear more about your books and how you might impact. I think that's such a powerful example. And, as Thomas Berry would say, each of us has our great work. Everybody has our ecological niche and our important role to play. And this is one of the messages that we're really bringing forth with the Journey to the Universe project. We're not just consumers. We're not we don't need to be these ravages on the earth. We can be partners. We can be earth keepers. We can help propagate biodiversity. I was at a talk this past week. We had a graduate conference on religion and ecology, and they had a musical concert that was recording coastal seagrass in Virginia. And they used data on the oxygenation and the recovery of this population to actually create music based on the data. And so here's this singing coastal grassland that had been nearly extinct from the region due to overdevelopment. And now the coastal grasses are both proliferating along the shoreline. And it all started with one fisherman stumbling upon that patch of seagrass. And they started to just plant little bits of seagrass. And so I'm so glad you're bringing forth this idea that each of us has something that we can contribute, even in our small, humble ways.
Well, even that small idea of taking part of your lawn and making it clover or whatever, native plants. That has impact. You have neighbors walking past that lawn.
Exactly, yeah.
People notice it. They think about it, and they think when they next come to pick up grass seed, is that what I want?
Exactly,
I
right.
have seen another example, and I like that example. I talked to that lady, she was right.
Exactly, yeah. Studies have shown this with solar panels, the influence that those can have, and the Leave the Leaves campaign, right? Leaves are really important habitats for insect larvae, and they also help replenish the soil, right? So when we leave the leaves, we signal to the people around us, that they have an important ecological function. And native, of course, how much food we could grow, how many native plants we could propagate by rewilding lawns. I mean, it's tremendous. It's tremendous. Yeah. We're doing okay. Good seeing. Oh, wonderful. Okay, we could keep going all night, but do want to. Yeah.
I just wanted to express my appreciation for the emphasis you put on the connection between spirituality and helping the environment. When we all think about, nature and ecology, but to create zealots of spiritual people trying to take the environment on the heart level rather than the brain level. Really, it was a good point. I just was very
Thank you. I'm glad you resonated with that message. And I think for a while I didn't exactly know how to reconcile my environmental consciousness with my spirituality, but through folks like Thomas Berry or Teilhard de Chardin, I've really seen the connection. Teilhard talks about spirit matter as being interconnected parts of the same reality. Whatever your entryway is into this conversation, I think it's an important catalyst for ecological renewal. One of the great champions for the environment is Pope Francis, who is fighting for his life right now in a hospital in Rome. And we're in the 10th anniversary now of Laudato Si, which is his encyclical on the environment, which calls for, in Pope's words, ecological conversion. And that has been a hugely influential document for 1.3 billion Catholics and many people of conscience and faith all across the world. And so I just wanted to hold up as well folks like Pope Francis, the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew from the Greek Orthodox tradition has been a huge advocate for caring for a common home. And so, yeah, I think many of us can draw on our ancestral traditions and spiritualities to really come together for the common cause.
Just wondered if you could tell us a little more about what you learned in Sri Lanka about the Buddhist tradition and its what it gave you in terms of spiritual guidance and the considering your.
Thank you for that question. I want to recognize first that religions are complex. They're not monoliths. As we like to say with the Religion Ecology project, religions have their problems and promise. So on one hand, you have Buddhist nationalism in Sri Lanka that is weaponized to harm Muslims, and in some cases, Tamil Hindus as well. Yet, I experience among common, good, pious Buddhist people a tremendous, profound experience of hospitality and generosity. This teaching of anatta, or no non-self, I really saw in practice among many people I stayed with. It's this teaching that the self is ultimately empty. And everything is deeply in interrelationship. I experienced that firsthand. I remember with my host mother I spoke about earlier, Kusumananda, who was this tremendous farmer. She was a grandmother and would climb fruit trees and haul milk up and down the mountain, and was seemingly unfazed while caring for her grandkids and doing all these like amazing ecological vocations. And I remember when I was staying in this kind of abandoned small house up in the mountain for most of my time, but my last visit I went and stayed in their house. And when I arrived, there was a bed set up on the floor, and I was like, okay, I'll settle in, and get ready to sleep. Unfortunately, no, I'm sleeping on the floor. You're sleeping in my bed. I said, really? She said, yeah, and she insisted. She gave up her own bed for me to sleep in. When we think about radical hospitality, I'll always remember that. I ended up at a field hospital one night due to food poisoning. I probably had 15 people from this village come with porridge, with rice, with drinks to support me. This radical hospitality is really quite profound.
I want to tell you that I was in Sri Lanka a long time ago, 1983, just for 3 weeks. And, that expression, the third world, I'm sure plenty of people have experienced this when you go to countries outside the Western world, especially somewhere like Sri Lanka. It felt like a different planet. Everything was different. And one of those things you feel right away is that maybe unlike some of the Western religions, their entire world, their view of the world, their life is they're immersed in that Buddhism. It affects everything, and it's how they see the world. I visited some temples in honor of the Gora. I don't think that's there, but I went to temples where there were monks living, and there were monks living in those temples uninterrupted for 2,500 years. And so really, Buddhism is the culture. I have a friend who still spends time there, and he has some, like many Western, some local people living with them and helping him with things. And they'll find an insect and they won't kill it. They have to take it outside and put it in the sun. So it's I was really impressed and changed by the relationship of Buddhism to the entire lives through the world and each other.
Need to really share that connection to Sri Lanka, to some of these ancient civilizations like Anuradhapura, which are incredible, gemstones of civilization. The accomplishments of these communities. There were tens of thousands of Buddhist monks living around the turn of the first millennium, and incredibly elaborate rice cultivation, beautiful ancient Buddha statues that are still standing. It's really an amazing place. And, I think you also saw firsthand the way that spirituality can infuse so many elements of everyday life. It's it's pretty remarkable to behold.